Hey everyone, I just feel so excited that my brain is finally ready for me to talk about one of my most favorite subjects, and that is consciousness and the layers of selves, and especially moving into the idea of shared consciousness, group consciousness, macro consciousness, really large level. And so I want to invite you to take 3 deep breaths to help us arrive right here and right now, and then I'll share some more. So okay, so for a while now, I've been feeling like it's important for me to speak about macro consciousness and the potential that we as a species can be moving towards forms of group consciousness or shared consciousness. And I want to talk about that probably over multiple videos. And starting off, I'm going to bring in a model of multiple selves that I found from my Insta friend Meridian Azura. See, there's her name right there. And I think her Instagram is @MeridianAzura. And so one day she posted this artwork and it really spoke to me. It was 99% the same. There's a little bit of a glare. 99% the same as how I see layers of self and consciousness. So over here, you know, you're familiar with the idea of an inner child and a shadow self. Depending on your exposure to psychology and self-help, you probably already heard that we're comprised of a number of selves. Certainly my pain body can escalate to the loud, angry self proportions. Inner child gets some days. Archetypes that we identify with, you might feel like you're a healer or a teacher, martyr. You know, there's a number of archetypes. I especially like Carolyn Mace's work on that in her book Soul Contracts. And so I want to point out this middle part here. Okay, so she has it labeled as the human self, soul self, and the higher self. And like I said, this is about 99% identical to the way I was holding it within me. So when I saw this artwork, I just had to have a copy, and I got permission to use this in a video. But gosh, that was probably almost 2 years ago now. It's just taken me that long to get together to talk about it. So using my language, but keeping her diagram in your mind, I'm just going to share that within the boundary of myself, here's my skin, and right now we could say this is the boundary of myself, and within me I'm made up of a lot of different selves, like we just saw the shadow self, the child self. And if I'm on a spiritual path, my one of the goals of the spiritual path toward some kind of enlightenment or expansion of consciousness is to integrate and understand the self well enough that you can transcend the self and open a channel up and connect with one's higher self. And the higher self is, in my experience and understanding, is timeless and not specifically stapled into one point in space. So it's this expansive, large self. Some of you might think of it as a soul. My higher self is infinite. It is not limited to just the present. It expands into the past and the future, and dimensions in directions that we don't yet understand as far as time and space. And the times when I'm successful in all of my personal goals, such as meditating, eating well, practicing presence, it's possible to move past the little chatty monkey mind and move past the distractions and really connect with one's higher self. And that experience is almost like having a guardian angel, but recognizing that I am the guardian angel. Now, the higher self, being so luminous and multidimensional and transdimensional, the higher self doesn't fit completely inside of this physical vessel. So when we're working on our spiritual goals of expanding our awareness and our consciousness, we're looking at ways to connect more with that higher self, bring that higher self down into the human self. Now, if you're watching this, you've most likely already had some kind of peak experience where your idea of self was temporarily obliterated and you felt expanded, and you may have felt at one with the entire cosmos, or you may have felt really at one with a particular ecosystem. You could have even had an experience of oneness where you felt at one with all the participants at a certain music festival. That happens. And these peak moments are transcendental. We become much more than just what I call the local self. And I have a couple of other videos that talk about the location of consciousness. And if you're into what I'm saying here, I encourage you to rewatch or watch the location of consciousness video from 10 months ago, because it's all connected. And I'm building on that over the next several videos. So, now how do I get from here and from talking about the macro consciousness, the higher consciousness, into some kind of a macro consciousness? Well, okay, so I am me, I am Tree, and I connect to my higher self as often as possible. Real life gets in the way and I get distracted and anxious, and I'm not really in an open flow where I'm consciously aware of my higher self, and yet she's always there. She's always still a part of that, part of me, and I'm a part of her. And I'm also an American, and especially right now today when I say American, that's going to bring up a lot of labels in your mind, and I'm going to try not to trigger our political triggers, but whenever I say American, right now, you could probably list off 20 things that means to you, good, bad, or otherwise. And you know, as a reasonable, intelligent person, you know that I don't personally represent all 20 of those things that you just rattled off. So I am participating in a macro-conscious entity, also called an egregore, E-G-E, egregore, E-G-R-E-G-O-R-E. I'll put that as one of our hashtags. The egregore is a macro-conscious entity that has a personality. It has a culture. It has it can have a location. In this case, America has an obvious location, and the thoughts and feelings and ideas of America exist in the connection to the soil, as well as the abstract spaces of millions of minds. I should see how big our country is. It could be 1 billion or so, I don't know. So the abstract space of every single American mind is the location for this macro-conscious entity. Now, it behaves. It has values. It has actions. You can kind of also correlate this with the idea of corporate personhood. Corporations have missions and values and behaviors, and they're comprised of hundreds or thousands of individuals. And I have, as a local self, my entire existence has been shaped by the fact that I am an American participating in this macro-conscious entity. And to whatever extent, I have also interacted with America as an individual. So I've made contributions. I used to work for a federal agency, but even in the days when I was in the service industry or the retail industry, I was still part of this very large network of transactions and behaviors that are part of America as an entity. So similar to the way I am relating to my higher self, I'm not 100% of locally, I'm not 100% of what my higher self is. And my higher self is not 100% the same as what my local self is. If we were the same, there wouldn't be any reason to have two selves here, the local self and the higher self. So in addition to my inner child and my pain body and my higher self, I have this part of myself that's in a constant feedback loop with the macro-conscious entity known as America. So what's the value of thinking about the macro-conscious entity? Well, there are a lot of them. So an egregore doesn't necessarily have to be conscious of itself as a self. So if you're an employee of Google, you could tell me all about your corporate culture. You could tell me all about your mission and your values and your customer service policies and the way you transact in the world. And you can feel inside yourself how I am part of Google, and I'm also Fred Wilson who lives in, Poughkeepsie or whatever. So you can feel there's a boundary between these selves, but you're actively participating in being Google every day, like 40 hours a week. So you can see how you're both the local self and this macro-conscious self. And depending on your corporate culture or your national culture or your particular path towards understanding consciousness, you maybe have never once considered that Google is an entity. And it would take a critical mass of individual minds to see and conceive of Google as a macro-conscious entity before Google would be conscious of itself as a self. Yeah, this is getting to be a pretty long video, and I know that I'm going to need to break it up into smaller sections. So right now I just want to leave you with this idea that your participants in multiple egregores, your family in your household can be a self. it's scales. So your family, you're a member of the First Baptist Church, that's one of your egregores. Your this community that you're in, if you're active in your community, the state or country or both. So there's multiple scales of selves, and these egregores behave. They have values, they transact, and yet they're not conscious of themselves as a self. So I feel there's just a whole lot of opportunity for creating positive change in the world and evolving ourselves as a species if we begin to conceive of these larger entities as a self. And then we begin the path of moving from unconsciousness to consciousness. Because you know from your own experience that when we are an entity who is unconscious, our values, goals, behaviors, transactions are colored by being unconscious. This is how we got to this place of having so many social, ecological, and economic problems, because all of these egregores functioning at this macro level are currently unconscious. And just one last thought. Some of you are already striving for Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness, or my favorite, Gaia consciousness. So at the higher, even higher levels than nations and corporations, we have entities that are part of the divine that have been inviting us for several thousand years to become more conscious. So I'm really excited about this topic, and consider this an introduction, and I'm going to double click on a bunch of these sub-concepts and create some videos, hopefully soon. But if you've been watching me, you know that I have a glitchy brain, and so I'm just going to have to flow with the flow. And on the days when I'm clear enough to share this information, I will. So I love you guys, and take care.